The first thing my daughter said wasn't hello. "We already found you a lovely apartment, Mom." She smiled when she said it, the way people smile at children before telling them something they think is for their own good. The burgers were still on the grill. My grandson was chasing a yellow ball across the backyard. Someone laughed near the patio. Life kept moving as though the sentence had not quietly split mine into two halves. By the time Emily finished explaining her plan, I had already made one decision. I simply hadn't told anyone yet. My name is Carol Whitaker. I was 61 years old that July, and I had spent 34 years as the elected county recorder in Albany County, Wyoming. People assume a recorder spends her life stamping papers. In truth, I spent 3 decades watching families reveal who they really were. Some celebrated inheritances. Some fought over fence lines no one had questioned for 50 years. Some smiled across my counter while secretly preparing lawsuits against their own brothers. Land never changes people. It simply gives them a reason to show themselves. My late husband David used to tease me, "You know every acre in this county better than the ranchers do." He wasn't entirely wrong. I knew which parcels flooded every spring, which mineral rights had been separated from the surface, which forgotten strips of land looked worthless until the state announced a new highway or utility corridor. Details mattered. They always had. Emily never cared about details. She preferred conclusions. She had inherited David's blue eyes and none of his patience. After he died 6 years earlier from pancreatic cancer, I tried to understand her impatience. Grief arrives differently for everyone. Mine became silence. Hers became urgency. Mom shouldn't be alone. Mom's house is too much work. Mom deserves something easier. Every sentence sounded loving. Every sentence quietly removed another piece of my independence. I let many of them pass. Maybe I shouldn't have. That Saturday's barbecue was supposed to celebrate my grandson Owen finishing elementary school. Instead, Emily waited until everyone had a plate before tapping her glass. "I actually have another announcement." Her husband Brian smiled before she spoke. That smile bothered me. Not because it was cruel, because it was rehearsed. Emily stood. "We've all been worried about Mom living out there by herself." Several relatives nodded politely. I know she won't say it herself, so Brian and I decided to help. Decided, not suggested, not discussed, decided. We found a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment near us. Elevators, security, everything she needs. People turned toward me, expecting gratitude. Emily continued. "And once we sell the house, the money can finally be invested properly instead of sitting there." She actually said we, not Mom. We. Someone clapped. Someone else said it sounded wonderful. My paper plate suddenly felt heavier than cast iron. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to worry about anything anymore." I looked at her fingers resting on mine. Those same hands had once fit entirely inside my palm. Those same hands I had held while teaching her to cross the street. Those same hands now believed they had permission to rearrange my life. I smiled. Not because I agreed, because after 34 years recording deeds, easements, trusts, and forgotten property lines, I had learned never to interrupt someone who believed they already owned something, especially when they didn't know the full map. That evening, after everyone drove away, I walked through my quiet house without turning on a single light. David's old workbench still stood exactly where he'd left it. His leather gloves still hung from the same nail. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved softly across the pasture. I opened the drawer beneath the workbench. Inside lay a worn manila folder. I hadn't touched it in almost 12 years. Until that night. When I finally lifted it into my hands, the phone rang. It was someone I hadn't heard from in nearly a decade. I was wondering if this number still belonged to Carol Whitaker. The voice was older, slower than I remembered. "It does." A brief silence followed. "I don't suppose you remember me. I usually remember voices before names." A quiet laugh. "Thomas Grady." I leaned against David's workbench. The name reached across 9 years and settled exactly where memory had left it. Thomas Grady had once owned nearly 6,000 acres west of Laramie. Ranch land, wind, endless sky. I had helped untangle one of the ugliest title disputes our county had ever seen. He had shaken my hand afterward and said, "You saved land that's been in my family since 1912. We never spoke again. Until now. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. You've called at an interesting one. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." My eyebrows lifted. "I sent 2 letters. I never received them." Another silence. "That's troubling." Something inside me tightened. "I also stopped by your house last Tuesday." I was home. No one answered. "I wasn't home Tuesday, but your daughter was." The workshop suddenly felt much smaller. Thomas continued carefully. "She told me she was handling your affairs now." Handling my affairs. Not helping. Not assisting. Handling. I assumed she meant with your permission. I said nothing. I should have called immediately. You just did. He exhaled. The energy company finally filed its preliminary route. My fingers tightened around the old manila folder. So it happened. It did. I closed my eyes. For 12 years, rumors had drifted across Wyoming. A transmission corridor, then a carbon pipeline, then a wind project. Each rumor faded. Until now. Thomas spoke again. "They're offering very serious money." "I imagine they are. They need continuous access. I know how easements work. I figured you would." He hesitated. "Carol, they can't build the route they want without your parcel. Not my house, not my pasture." One forgotten strip of ground. 43 acres everyone else had dismissed as rocky grazing land, including Emily. Especially Emily. I thanked Thomas and promised to call him the following morning. When I hung up, I finally opened the manila folder. Inside rested copies of documents David and I had signed in 1988. Most people remembered the mortgage. I remembered one sentence. "Parcel C shall remain the separate property of Carol Whitaker." David had insisted, "If anything ever happens to me," he'd said, "I want at least one thing nobody can ever pressure you into giving away." I had laughed at him. "We'll grow old together." "I hope so." Then he'd kissed my forehead. Hope isn't an estate plan. He was right, he often was. I carried the folder into the kitchen and made coffee, although it was nearly 10 at night. The house was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator humming. My cell phone vibrated again. "Emily." I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom, wasn't today exciting?" "Was it?" I think everyone finally understands that moving is the right choice. I noticed everyone had an opinion. You didn't object. "No. I knew you'd come around." I wrapped both hands around the warm mug. "When were you planning to tell me about the realtor?" Silence. Only 2 seconds. Long enough. "Oh, Brian may have mentioned something." "He didn't. We're just getting information without asking me. We're trying to help." There it was again. That word. Help. People can hide behind that word for years. "I'll think about everything," I said calmly. "Really? Really?" She sounded relieved. "I'll stop by tomorrow around lunch." "All right, we'll go over some paperwork." Paperwork. I almost smiled. Emily had no idea she had just used the one word guaranteed to make me read every line before signing anything. After we hung up, I placed David's folder beside my coffee. Then I noticed something I should have seen sooner. The envelope Thomas claimed he'd mailed, was already lying in my kitchen trash, opened, without me ever seeing it. I didn't touch the envelope, not yet. Instead, I pulled it gently from the trash and laid it flat on the kitchen table. The front was addressed in Thomas Grady's unmistakable handwriting. My name, my address, a postmark from Cheyenne 6 days earlier. The flap had been sliced open neatly with a letter opener, not torn, not ripped, opened by someone who intended to read it. Inside was a cover letter from an energy company I'd never heard of. Attached was a preliminary offer, 860,375. I read the number twice, not because I doubted it, because I knew exactly why they had started with that figure. They expected negotiations. No company ever opened with its highest number. Below it sat another page, a projected annual easement payment of $73,418 for as long as the corridor remained active. I folded the papers carefully back into the envelope. Money wasn't what made my hands tremble. It was the realization that someone had decided I shouldn't know the offer even existed. At 11 the next morning, Emily arrived carrying coffee and blueberry muffins. She kissed my cheek as if nothing had happened. "Morning, Mom." "Good morning." Brian followed with a leather portfolio tucked beneath his arm. That caught my attention immediately. People who bring portfolios usually expect signatures. Emily placed the muffins on the counter. "We thought we'd make this easy. I'm sure you did." Brian smiled. "We asked a realtor to prepare a market estimate." He slid several glossy pages toward me. "Color photographs, comparable sales. A cheerful estimate, $418,000. "It'll probably sell within 2 weeks," Emily said. "And then you can relax." I turned another page. There it was, a listing agreement, blank, waiting. I thought this was only information. It is. Then why does it require my signature? Emily looked at Brian before answering. "It's just so we don't lose time." Lose time. Interesting choice of words. I closed the folder. "I won't be signing anything today." Brian leaned back. "Carol, the market is changing. I've watched markets change since before either of you bought your first house." Emily sighed. "Mom, no." It was the first time I had interrupted her in years. I said I wasn't signing. She looked genuinely surprised, not angry, confused, as though she had never considered that I might refuse. "We're only trying to protect you. I know that's what you're telling yourselves." Silence settled over the kitchen. I poured 3 cups of coffee. No one touched theirs. Finally, Brian cleared his throat. "Would it help if we scheduled another meeting?" "Perhaps. Next week. I'll let you know." Emily forced a smile. "Okay." She stood to leave, disappointment written plainly across her face. Then she paused. "Oh, one more thing. Yes, if anyone calls about the property," she hesitated, "just tell them to speak with me." I looked directly into her eyes. "No." Her smile disappeared. "I own this property, Emily. I know that." "Do you?" Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she picked up her purse. "We'll talk again." "I'm sure we will." After they drove away, I locked the front door. Then I dialed Thomas. "I think my mail has been intercepted." I was afraid of that. "I need every document your office has. I already made copies." "Good. And Carol?" "Yes? I didn't mention this yesterday because I wanted you to see the offer first." "What is it?" "They've already asked it approaching neighboring landowners." "I assumed they would. They've secured almost every parcel." "Almost?" A pause. "Yours is the only one they don't have." I looked out across the pasture where David had once taught Emily to ride her first horse. The wind moved exactly as it always had. Steady, patient, invisible. Sometimes the strongest things are. Thomas lowered his voice. "The entire western route depends on your 43 acres. I rested my hand on David's old manila folder. For the first time since the barbecue, I understood why someone had wanted that letter hidden from me. And suddenly, my daughter's rush to sell the house no longer felt like concern. It felt like a deadline. I had spent 34 years watching people lie across a desk. The successful ones never raised their voices. They spoke softly, reasonably. They smiled. The dangerous part was never what they said. It was what they quietly omitted. Emily had omitted one very important fact. She knew someone was trying to reach me. The following morning, I drove to Thomas Grady's ranch. His office overlooked rolling pasture that disappeared into the Wyoming horizon. Windmills turned slowly in the distance like enormous clock hands measuring a future none of us could stop. Thomas looked older than I remembered. His shoulders had rounded. His handshake hadn't. I wish this visit were under better circumstances. So do I. He handed me a thick folder. Everything the company has filed publicly. Maps, engineering surveys, environmental reports, projected construction schedules. Then he unfolded one oversized map across the conference table. A bright red line crossed half the county. It stopped exactly where my parcel began. Then it split. One route curved north, another south, both dramatically longer, both dramatically more expensive. They don't want either alternative, Thomas said. I can see why. The additional construction costs are estimated at nearly $9 million. I looked up. So my 43 acres saved them almost $9 million. Approximately. I traced the red line with one finger. For decades, that rocky strip had produced little more than stubborn grass and jackrabbits. Now it had become the missing piece in a project stretching across 3 states. Sometimes value arrives long after everyone stops looking. Before I left, Thomas hesitated. There's something else. I had a feeling. He slid another document toward me. It wasn't from the energy company. It was from a real estate brokerage. Across the top, in bold letters, confidential property evaluation. My address. Estimated market value. Broker comments. Then, near the bottom, owner appears motivated to relocate. Daughter coordinating communication. I read the sentence twice. I never authorized this. I know. They inspected my property from the road. I turned another page. There were photographs, my barn, my fences. Even David's workshop, taken with a telephoto lens. Without my knowledge. Thomas watched my expression carefully. I thought you deserved to know. No. I closed the folder. I deserved to know sooner. Driving home, I remembered something David used to say. When people stop asking, Carol, start asking twice as many questions. He had trusted very few people, not because he was suspicious, because he had grown up watching neighbors lose ranches one signature at a time. Back then I thought he worried too much. Now I wondered whether he'd simply seen farther than I had. Emily called before I reached town. Mom, where are you? Out. You were at home. I know. I wanted to introduce you to Melissa. Who's Melissa? The realtor. I wasn't expecting company. Emily laughed nervously. It would have only taken a few minutes. I imagine it would. We're all trying to stay ahead of this. There it is again. What? We. Silence. Finally, she spoke. I don't understand why you're making this difficult. I don't understand why you're making decisions that belong to me. Another silence. Then came the sentence, I would remember for the rest of my life. You don't always understand how these things work anymore. The words were gentle, almost kind, which made them infinitely more painful. After 34 years interpreting deeds that lawyers argued over, after helping judges untangle property disputes, after teaching younger clerks the difference between ownership and possession, my own daughter had calmly suggested I no longer understood my own affairs. I pulled my truck onto the shoulder of the highway. The Wyoming wind rocked the vehicle gently. When I answered, my voice surprised even me, perfectly steady. Emily, yes? From now on, no one enters my property without my permission. Mama, no. Realtor. No surveyor. No contractor. No buyers. But... And if anyone wishes to discuss my land, I looked across the endless prairie. They will speak to me. I ended the call before she could answer. For several minutes, I simply sat there listening to the wind. Then my phone buzzed again. Not Emily. A notification from my bank. New online profile update requested. I frowned. I hadn't requested any changes. And according to the alert, someone had attempted to add a second authorized contact to my accounts just 12 minutes earlier. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to my bank. The alert had arrived less than 20 minutes earlier, and after 34 years around legal records, I had learned one simple rule. When something feels urgent, verify the facts before you react to the fear. Linda Morris had managed the same branch for nearly 15 years. She looked up from her desk, smiled, and then frowned the moment she saw my face. "Carol, I need 10 minutes. You have as long as you need." She closed her office door behind us. "What happened?" I handed her my phone. She read the notification twice. "Did you request this?" "No." She turned her monitor toward herself and began typing. The room fell silent except for the clicking of her keyboard. After nearly a minute, she stopped. "Someone started the process online this morning." "Finished?" "No." My shoulders relaxed slightly. "It failed because they couldn't answer one of the security questions." "What question?" Linda smiled faintly. "What was the name of your first employer?" I almost laughed. Emily would have guessed the hospital. "But—" "My first job was shelving books at the county library when I was 16. Linda nodded. "That's exactly why security questions exist." She continued reading the log. The request included an explanation. "What explanation?" She hesitated. "Customer's daughter assisting due to age-related memory concerns." Neither of us spoke. The words floated between us. Age-related memory concerns. The same idea, the same narrative, different office. Different paperwork. Someone wasn't simply helping me anymore. Someone was building a file. Linda looked directly into my eyes. "Carol, I know, no one can make changes without your authorization. I know. But if someone keeps presenting themselves as acting for you, they'll eventually find someone willing to believe them." She nodded. "I'd recommend placing verbal verification requirements on every account." "I was hoping you'd say that." Within 20 minutes, every account carried new instructions. No changes, no additional users, no address updates, no transfers above $5,000, nothing. Unless they heard my voice first. As I walked toward my truck, my phone rang again. "Emily," I answered. "Hi, Mom. Why did the bank call me?" "They called you?" "They said they couldn't discuss your accounts anymore." "I asked them not to." A long pause. "Why would you do that?" "Because they're my accounts. I've always helped you. You've had access. That's the same thing." "No." Another silence. Then her tone softened. "You think I'm trying to steal from you. I didn't say that. But you're acting like it." I looked across the parking lot. "I think you're making decisions you were never invited to make." "I've sacrificed so much for you." There it was. Not anger. Debt. The invisible bill children sometimes present to parents who never asked to owe them anything. "I appreciate everything you've done." "Then why are you treating me like a stranger?" "Because strangers ask permission." She inhaled sharply. "You've changed." "No. I watched two sparrows fighting over crumbs near the curb. I've stopped saying yes before anyone asks." She hung up. That evening, I sat on David's porch as the sun disappeared behind the Laramie Range. The leather folder rested beside me. So did the energy company's offer. I still hadn't responded. There was no reason to rush. People negotiating from desperation hurry. People negotiating from strength let silence do the work. At exactly 8:14 p.m., headlights swept across my driveway. A black SUV. Two people stepped out. Neither was Emily. One wore a tailored gray suit. The other carried a long cylindrical case filled with rolled maps. They walked confidently toward my front porch, as though they already expected me to say yes. I already knew who they were before they introduced themselves. Large infrastructure companies have a particular kind of confidence. Not arrogance, momentum. They arrive assuming the future has already agreed with them. The woman in the gray suit extended her hand. "Mrs. Whitaker? I'm Rebecca Sloan with High Plains Transmission." I shook it once. "And this is Daniel Pierce, our senior route engineer." The man carrying the maps nodded politely. "May we have a few minutes of your time?" "You already have 3. A faint smile crossed Rebecca's face. "I've heard you're very direct. I spent 34 years recording deeds." "Then you understand why we're here." "I imagine I do." I invited them onto the porch, but not into the house. David always believed important conversations belonged where everyone could leave easily. Rebecca placed a leather folder on the table between us. We're hoping to acquire a permanent easement across Parcel C. I know, she blinked. You've already reviewed the proposal. I've reviewed enough. Daniel carefully unrolled one of the maps. The red corridor crossed my land exactly as Thomas had shown me. He pointed toward a narrow section between two ridges. This route minimizes environmental impact and avoids relocating existing utility lines. It also saves your company millions. Neither of them answered. Silence can be surprisingly informative. Finally, Rebecca spoke. Our initial compensation package is very competitive. I've read it. We're prepared to answer any questions. I only have one. She leaned forward. Go ahead. When did you first contact my daughter? The air changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Rebecca's smile disappeared. I'm sorry, you heard me. She looked briefly toward Daniel before answering. We've spoken with several neighboring property owners. That wasn't my question. Another pause. Our records indicate your daughter introduced herself as someone helping coordinate communication. Did she tell you she owned this property? No. Did she tell you she could negotiate on my behalf? Rebecca chose her words carefully. She implied she was assisting you. I see. I folded my hands. And did either of you ever verify that with me? No. No. 2 simple letters. Sometimes that's all the truth requires. Rebecca closed her folder. It appears there may have been a misunderstanding. No. I met her eyes. There wasn't. She waited. My daughter misunderstood who gets to speak for me. Neither representative attempted to defend Emily. Professionals know when a conversation has shifted beyond business. Rebecca reached into her briefcase. I think we prefer to start over. She removed a second envelope, thicker than the first. This reflects a revised offer. I didn't open it. What changed? Our valuation? No. I gently pushed the envelope back across the table. What changed was your understanding of who you're negotiating with. For the first time that afternoon, Daniel smiled. Just slightly, as though he'd finally met the person Thomas Grady had described. Rebecca nodded. Fair enough. She placed the envelope back into her case. When would you be willing to continue discussions? When I'm ready. We can wait. I know. They stood. Before leaving, Rebecca paused at the bottom of the porch steps. For what it's worth, Mrs. Borth. Whitaker, yes, we've worked with hundreds of landowners. And? Most people let someone else speak for them. I spent my career making sure signatures belong to the right people. She smiled. I suppose I should have expected that. After they drove away, I sat alone for a long time. The Wyoming sky stretched endlessly overhead. David would have enjoyed that meeting, not because of the money, because I had finally stopped apologizing for owning what was mine. Just before sunset, my phone vibrated. It wasn't a call. It was a text from Emily. Mom, why did the energy company tell me they will only deal directly with you? A second message arrived before I could answer. What exactly aren't you telling me? I looked at both messages, then quietly locked my phone. Some conversations become more valuable when they're allowed to wait until everyone is finally ready to hear the truth. Emily arrived the next morning before 8. She didn't knock. She opened the screen door the way she had since she was 16, then stopped halfway across the porch. The coffee was already brewing. I had set out 2 mugs, not because I expected peace. Because difficult conversations deserve chairs instead of battlefields. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, and she was still wearing yesterday's clothes. Mom, sit. She remained standing. How much is the land worth? I poured coffee into both mugs. I asked you to sit. Her voice cracked. Please. That single word told me more than the question had. Fear had finally arrived. Not concern, not guilt. Fear. She sat. I slid a mug toward her. She wrapped both hands around it but didn't drink. The company won't answer my calls. They shouldn't. They said you're the only person authorized to negotiate. That's correct. She stared at the steam rising from the coffee. Brian says they must have offered you a lot. I didn't answer. Mom, she looked up. How much? I held her gaze. Why does the number matter? Because it changes everything. I nodded slowly. There it is. What? The truth. She frowned. I've been listening to you for weeks. You talked about my safety, my future, my house, my loneliness. But the moment you realized there was money involved, I gently tapped the table once. The first question became, how much? Emily looked away. I didn't mean it like that. I believe you. You do? I believe you don't even realize when money becomes the loudest voice in the room. Silence settled between us. After nearly a minute, she whispered, Brian knew something. I suspected as much. He has a friend at the county planning office. I said nothing. He heard rumors about the transmission project months ago. There it was, not certainty. Rumors. Enough to make someone hurry. Enough to convince themselves they were simply being practical. He thought if we sold the property before negotiations started, you'd receive less than it was worth, I finished. Emily slowly nodded. He said companies always take advantage of older people, and his solution was to get ahead of them. I folded my hands. By getting ahead of me. Tears welled in her eyes. I told myself we were protecting you. I know, I really believed it. I know that too, she covered her face. I never opened your mail because I wanted to hurt you. My heartbeat slowed. She had admitted it herself. I told myself you worried too much. I know. I thought if I handled everything, she couldn't finish. I reached into the drawer beside the table, then placed Thomas's opened envelope between us. She stared at it. You recognize it? A tiny nod. You opened it. Another nod. I was going to tell you. When? She had no answer. Instead, she began crying, not dramatically, quietly, like someone watching the story she'd told herself collapse piece by piece. After a long while, she whispered, I'm sorry. I believe she meant it, but apologies are not repairs. They're beginnings, not endings. I stood and walked into David's workshop. When I returned, I carried the old manila folder. I placed it gently beside the envelope. Do you remember this folder? Emily nodded. Dad kept everything in there. Yes. I opened it to the page David had signed 36 years earlier. The sentence was still underlined in blue ink. Parcel C shall remain the separate property of Carol Whitaker. Emily read it twice, then looked at me. He knew. He planned. He trusted that one day I'd meet protection. I closed the folder. Even if it had to be from people we loved. She lowered her head. I don't expect you to forgive me. I won't answer that today. She nodded. I understand. I stood and walked to the front door. Outside, another vehicle had just turned into the driveway. Not Brian, not the energy company. Thomas Grady stepped out holding a fresh set of documents. He looked toward the house, then toward me. It looks like we're ready. I nodded once. Yes. For the first time, we finally were. Thomas didn't bring lawyers. He brought certainty. The folder in his hands contained 3 documents: a revised compensation proposal, a draft easement agreement, and an independent valuation prepared by engineers who had nothing to gain by flattering anyone. We sat around my kitchen table, the same table where, only a week earlier, my future had been announced for me. Thomas adjusted his glasses. They've increased the offer. I looked at the first page. Signing bonus, $3,187,460. Below it, another line. Annual easement payment, $81,263. Guaranteed. Indexed. Transferable to my estate. Thomas folded his hands. They don't want to lose this corridor. I know. And they know you know. That was the difference. Not the money. Knowledge. Emily stared silently at the figures. Her face had gone pale. I had no idea. I know. Thomas slid another document toward me. This agreement also includes restoration requirements, groundwater monitoring, fencing standards, and penalties if they fail to meet any obligation. I smiled. They finally sent someone who read the details. He smiled back. They finally realized who they were negotiating with. 3 weeks later, I signed. Not because anyone pressured me, because every condition I demanded had been accepted, every fence replaced, every access road restored, every future payment protected, every line exactly where it belonged. The company received its easement. I kept everything else: the house, the ranch, David's workshop, 42 acres surrounding the easement, and, for the first time in years, complete peace. Brian called twice. I didn't answer. His attorney wrote one polite letter suggesting that, because Emily had contributed substantial caregiving efforts, perhaps the family should discuss sharing the proceeds. Thomas laughed when he finished reading it. "You don't owe anyone compensation for making decisions about your own property." I didn't think so. "We'll file our response. There won't be one." He looked surprised. "No, no." I folded the letter and dropped it into the shredder. "Silence is sometimes the clearest answer." He nodded. "I've always liked working with you, Carol." Emily came every Sunday after that. Not to discuss money, not to discuss land. She came for coffee. Sometimes we spoke for hours, sometimes hardly at all. Trust doesn't return in a dramatic speech. It returns one ordinary afternoon at a time. Months later, she handed me a small envelope. "I closed the account where I kept copies of your documents." I looked at her. "I also wrote letters to the bank, the realtor, and the energy company." "What did you say?" "That no one should ever contact me about your affairs again." I placed the envelope back into her hands. "You didn't have to show me." "I know. I needed to know I'd done it." For the first time in a long while, I believed her. The first annual easement payment arrived on a cool October morning. I didn't buy a luxury car. I didn't move. I didn't renovate the house. Instead, I established the David Whitaker Rural Trade Scholarship at Laramie County Community College. Every year, it would help students studying surveying, welding, heavy equipment maintenance, and agricultural engineering, the kinds of professions that quietly build America while rarely appearing in headlines. David would have liked that. He always admired people who fixed things instead of talking about them. One evening, nearly a year after the barbecue, Emily stood beside me on the porch, watching the sunset. "I'm still ashamed. I know. I almost convinced myself I was protecting you." I nodded. The easiest lie to believe. I looked across the pasture where the transmission tower stood far beyond the ridge, almost invisible against the Wyoming sky. Is the one that makes us feel generous while taking away someone else's choice. She slipped her hand into mine. Not to lead me, not to guide me, simply to hold it. This time I let her, because forgiveness is not pretending the wound never happened. It is knowing the scar will always be there. And deciding it no longer gets to decide the future. David had been right all those years ago. Hope isn't an estate plan, but respect. Respect is the strongest foundation any family will ever own.